Amanda, when we first decided to do a standalone scary movie for the Halloween season, I have to admit, I was not looking forward to it. It's just not my favorite genre of movies. I'm kind of more of a rom-com girl. But I will say, even though it was a scary movie, I found myself laughing out loud a few times.
Same here. I mean, I know we're supposed to be terrified when we were watching this, and I was ready to get scared from my memories of my childhood, but I found myself laughing more than screaming. And you know what? My childhood, the 80s, they were full of slasher horror movies that had many sequels. So this would not be an 80s movie podcast without us covering at least one.
That is so true. And I will say, although I did actually laugh this go around, back in the day, I wasn't doing so much giggling.
No, you are not. Well, buckle up, real fans, because we're diving into a slasher movie that's equal parts spooky, cheesy, and unintentionally hilarious. I'm Amanda.
And I'm Missy, and this is Real Sisters Rewind.
Join us as we go back to the 80s.
Welcome to Real Sisters Rewind, back to the 80s, the podcast for movie lovers who believe they just don't make them like they used to back in the 80s. I'm Missy.
And I'm Amanda. If you're joining us for the first time, we're two sisters who love rewatching our favorite 80s flicks. But before we dive into today's terrifying topic, we'd love for you, if you like the Real Sisters vibe, to leave us a 5-star review and subscribe.
And as a token of appreciation for those of you who do, we're sending out Real Sisters stickers for those 5-star reviews. So just take a screenshot and email it to hello@realsistersrewind.com.
That's right. I can't wait to get those stickers out. So today we have a very special guest with us.
Yes, we do.
We love when we have guests join us. And to help us break down this 80s classic, we invited this special guest today to join us because he knows a lot about this topic.
Yes, he does.
He is an actor, director, writer, and producer of films, and serves as the chair of the film program at Loyola University here in New Orleans. He has directed several horror films himself, including Demons, The Dinner Party, and Demigod, all of which you can check out on your favorite streaming platform, if you're so inclined. And we're excited to have you, our longtime friend, Miles Doleac. We're so glad you're here with us.
Yay!
And we also have to mention, not only is he taking time out from his busy film and work schedule, he's also taking time out from his sweet family. He and his beautiful wife, Lindsay, just had a new baby girl, Lily. So thank you for taking time to be with us.
It is my absolute pleasure to be here, guys. Thank you so much for inviting me. As a child of the 80s, these movies are near and dear to my heart, so I absolutely adore what you guys are doing. I got to take a listen to the E.T. episode. You guys were awesome. That is such a special film. I recently screened that film in my Screenwriting 2 class, and I continue to be impressed by its script in particular, told in such a beautiful way from the perspective of children, speaking of children, and that's just something you don't often see done well in a big Hollywood movie like that. So kudos to you guys, and I'm really thrilled to be here.
Thank you. And that's something we definitely agree with about that script. Like, that was something that we noticed rewatching it now as adults that we didn't think about so much as kids watching it.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, but what an honor to have such an expert on our podcast today. So everyone, grab your popcorn and let's go back to 1984 and see what was going on in the world and share some fascinating facts about our movie.
A Nightmare on Elm Street was released on November 9th, 1984. Can you all believe it's been nearly 40 years since Freddy Krueger first invaded our dreams?
No, it makes me feel really old, and you two are younger than me. So, but I guess we've all spanned that 40-year cycle, huh?
Yeah.
November 9th, when I was thinking about this, November 9th, it was just after Halloween. And, so they were promoting it at a great time. But, at that time of year, especially in the South where we're all from, the weather's cool. It's like bonfire type weather, right? And I remember it all too well because I was 16 years old. And I'm guessing you guys were like 8 or 9, right?
Yes. I was 9, I think, eight. And I just remember about this particular movie. You and your friends, Missy, because you were in high school,
Yeah.
coming home from this movie. I remember being in our old house and my bedroom was right up off the stairs. And I remember y'all coming up the stairs and being so just like giddy and scared and terrified and talking about how scary it was. And um, just thinking like, oh my gosh, I don't think I could ever see, I don't think I could ever watch this. It sounds so scary.
Yeah, it was scary. We did have a big movie night. All my friends went, and it was great. What about you, Miles? You did not see it in theaters. Tell me.
I did not see it in theaters. It was not unusual for me to go see films in the theater at this age. In fact, I saw Raiders of the Lost Ark in 1981 at the Hardy Street Cinema at 6 years old. I also saw E.T., which we discussed earlier. But I did not see this one at the theater because, of course, it was rated R. So
Yes.
I caught it late night at a sleepover for the first time on HBO. And
Wait,
Did it scare you to death?
um, I don't know if I was scared, but I was certainly fascinated. All of these, the 80s was a time where you had all of these horror icons coming into view. Freddy, of course, and Jason Voorhees and Michael Myers, who had come on the scene in the late 70s, but continued his run into the 80s. And as a kid, growing up loving movies, these figures, these films were unavoidable. So it was really easy to get sucked in and want to be a part of this world.
two things I want to say about that. One is if Halloween had been in the 80s, if the first Halloween, that would have been my pick because I love that movie. But I love that you said HBO because we're the same age
Mm.
and Missy's just a couple years older than us.
Just 8.
But there are so many movies that we're reviewing that Missy saw in the theater, but I said the same thing. I'm like, oh, I caught it on HBO. That was like the window to the movies for me because if I
Yeah.
didn't get to see it because I was too young or whatever, it would be on HBO. That's so funny.
Yeah.
Missy, did y'all really think it was scary then? Or were you
Oh,
just like,
yes. I was
okay.
terrified of Freddy Krueger. And I didn't even like to see the commercials when they would come on TV. I'd like, get up and change the channel. And you noticed I said, get up and change the channel.
Well,
Yeah, you did.
the burn makeup, the makeup in particular was quite terrifying in the day, and a lot of the practical effects that you see in the film were groundbreaking. And I
Yeah.
was thinking, watching it again in preparation for the podcast, I think of the scene where Tina is climbing on the ceiling, and I was like, that would have been a really cool effect in 1984. And the same is true of a lot of the practical effects. I mean, the blood spray from the bed, and it. So, I mean, Wes Craven and John Carpenter. We'll touch on him maybe later. Are doing a lot of really neat stuff with practical effects.
Like innovative. It was innovative, you're saying.
They are at the cutting edge of the practical effects work that's being done in the 80s. Yeah.
I think we have to keep that in mind as now when I watch it, I get a little tickled, but it's important to remember that.
Yeah.
And speaking of remembering back in that time period, 1984 was a time when the world was a different place. And I miss those days. What was happening in music, sister?
Well, Over on the music charts, Caribbean Queen by Billy Ocean was sitting at the #1 spot. And it was just that perfect mix of the 80s, like synthesizer and smooth vocals. Like this song was the bomb. I mean, I still can get an earworm with Caribbean Queen.
Oh, it was on Night Tracks on TBS, or I can't remember what station.
TBS.
Was it
TBS, yes.
All the time I can remember Caribbean Queen. And even though if I heard it, I would just keep singing it, like you said, I did not know the right words. But
You thought it was Caribou Queen?
yes. I don't know what it was, but I was singing
Caribou
along.
Queen. Yeah.
Yes. And I really didn't like it, but it was just catchy. And I really didn't like the video, and it was on all the time. Did you watch Night Tracks, Miles?
I did. I watched Night Tracks. I watched MTV.
But
we
had Night Tracks before MTV.
Yes.
Yeah.
I should also say on the music front, a month before the release of Nightmare on Elm Street, U2 released its fourth album, and really the album that put them on my radar, The Unforgettable Fire, which was released on October 1st of 1984. So it was a time, shall we say.
I mean, all the music.
Yeah.
Well, also at this time, if you picked up a copy of People magazine this particular week, you would see Shirley MacLaine on the cover, and she was fresh off her Oscar win for Terms of Endearment, which I actually did not watch until I was in high school. And one of our dear friends, Mr. Clifton Hyde, who maybe we can get him on sometime, is the one that introduced me to that movie. And we went to Blockbuster Video to rent it and went back to my house to watch it.
Such a great movie. It's one we're definitely going to have to spotlight. There's so much greatness there. We can't even get started. But there was plenty happening in the news. President Ronald Reagan had just that week been reelected for his second term, winning in a landslide over Walter Mondale. Like Reagan won like 49 out of 50 states. Is that crazy to y'all thinking about our country today?
Yes.
I mean, 49 out of 50 states is crazy.
We will likely never see that kind of thing again.
You're exactly right. We probably never will.
No, but this also goes back to Miles, you'll see, I mean, literally every episode Ronald Reagan comes up in the politics part of our podcast, because it's just like he's all consuming in the 80s.
People loved him. I mean,
clearly
at
that time they did. It's crazy. But also the rubrics, I don't think I'm saying that right. How do you say it? Rubik's Cube.
I think it's Rubik's.
I'm saying rubric. Yeah, Rubik's Cube was at the height of its popularity, with people across the world obsessed with solving the colorful puzzle. There were even competitions to see who could solve it the fastest. Were either of y'all able to do it?
I was not.
Absolutely not.
Good. Yeah, I think we're all like in that. No, thank you.
But there's a trick. Like you can now like get on YouTube and it'll walk you through.
Yeah,
but like I don't even want to.
Why would you want to do that?
Yeah, I don't.
I did take the time to rearrange the stickers and to try to convince my parents that in fact I had solved the Rubik's Cube, which probably took as long as actually solving it. But I thought I was, real clever.
That is hysterical, Miles. That is the funniest thing I've ever heard. And those stickers, they could tell by looking that they were
like
peeled up on the sides. That is hysterical.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Well, Miles actually mentioned earlier that Nightmare on Elm Street was both written and directed by the king of horror, I guess you could call him, Wes Craven.
Yeah, so I think Wes has a claim to that title. John Carpenter certainly might have something to say about that as well. Both of these filmmakers broke out in the 1970s. with films that became classics of the genre. Carpenter with Halloween in 1978, and then Wes Craven with The Hills Have Eyes in 77. But it was really A Nightmare on Elm Street that made Wes Craven a household name. One thing is certain, the 80s saw horror become one of the most popular and bankable genres in film, and the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise has a lot to do with that.
Yeah, and the movie was rated R and had a runtime of 1 hour and 31 minutes. It was made on a budget of only around 1.1 million, but went on to gross over 57 million worldwide.
Yeah, and coming from a lesser-known outsider production house like New Line Cinema, that was massive. It was New Line's first serious commercial success, and it really played an enormous role in the growth of the studio that went on to produce monumental blockbusters like the Lord of the Rings trilogy. For almost a decade, New Line boasted the honor of having released the highest grossing independent, I say that with air quotes, but you can't see it, film of all time. Y'all know what film that was?
No.
Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles from
No way.
1990. So not quite 80s, but just on the cusp. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles grossed $135 million.
Cowabunga.
But Nightmare really paved the way for New Line and its mainstream success. And it was so successful, in fact, that New Line earned the nickname The House That Freddy Built, because it helped to establish New Line as a major player in Hollywood.
Miles, did they do Elf too? I think they did Elf.
I believe so.
Yeah, I'm almost positive they did. Yeah, I'm almost positive they did. All right, I have a question for you, Miles. What would it take today to produce a movie? When we're talking dollars and cents, what would it take today to produce a movie on a like that? What type of budget would we be looking at? If they did it for, what did you say, Amanda? $1 million?
$1 million. About $1 million.
I can confirm via the little computer in my pocket that Elf was a New Line Cinema product.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. Thank you.
But this movie today doesn't get made for less than $10 or $15 million.
Oh, wow.
Really?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, of course, inflation and all the things, but there are a lot of effects in this movie. As I mentioned earlier, many of them practical effects. So the makeup budget, the art department budget was significant. There are a number of stunts in the film. So these are things that would require significant resources by today's standards. So yeah, I can't imagine this film gets made for less than 15 or 20 million. And that's probably with a similar, like, low level, not really namey cast at the time, because even though this film introduces
some big stars.
Yes, one in particular, you'll probably talk about him later on. They were not household names by any stretch at the time.
Okay.
So this is a bargain basement success. At, what is it, 1.3 million?
1.1, I think. 1.1 is what she said.
Was the budget,
Yeah. All right, so one thing we do on all of our podcasts is we share some fascinating facts. So are y'all ready for one?
Yep.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Wes Craven was inspired to create Freddy Krueger after reading a series of LA Times articles about Cambodian refugees. Y'all, this is true. I fact-checked it. Cambodian refugees who died in their sleep after suffering from disturbing nightmares. They were young, healthy men who refused to sleep because of terrifying dreams. And when they did, they tragically passed away in their sleep. I mean, spooky, right?
Did you know that, Miles?
I did not know that.
I actually read that too. And I need to know more. Like, I just need to know more. But you said you fact checked it.
I
read it too.
I know, but because
Amanda's not buying it.
Yeah.
I can
She's
tell.
like, I called. Yeah.
No, I actually don't want to buy it, because that is like so terrifying. I want to believe that can't be true. That's bananas.
Well, I will say that when this film came out in the 80s and its sequels, I don't know about you guys, but I was utterly convinced that if you die in your sleep, in your nightmare, that you will really die.
100%.
Oh,
I mean, like that
I
was
kind of did too. Yeah.
I would talk to my friends. I'm like, do you think that's true? Oh, yes, it's 100% true. It happens. It happens all around the world all the time. People die in their nightmare and then they really die. So I don't know about the Cambodian refugees, but that was in the ether. Like people thought if you die in your nightmare, you're done.
Yeah.
Yep. You're going down. It's over. All right. Well, I actually that's crazy because I actually am thinking too, like in my nightmares, you don't actually die. So that's a whole nother thing too. Anyway, okay.
I will say I have never actually died in my nightmare.
That's what I'm saying.
That's what I'm saying.
You wake up just before you die.
Right.
Yeah.
Or before before you hit the ground or whatever.
Right.
Yeah, that's what I mean. All right. So let's talk really quick about Freddy himself. So many interesting tidbits here, but we'll start with this. He was played by Robert. Okay, is it England?
Yeah.
Or England?
Robert Englund.
Okay. All right.
And do you remember V, the miniseries?
Stop.
Yes.
On TV with the
lizard people aliens. Yes.
No, I didn't know that. Do you remember that show, Missy?
I remember it, but I never watched it because again, it wasn't my genre, you know?
Yeah, and you were probably like out with your friends.
Yeah.
But yeah, I do remember it was very spooky. So anyway, he became an instant horror icon with his burned face, like you said, the striped sweater that
freaked me out.
Recognize still today in Halloween if you see it. And the infamous glove with razor sharp blades. And really, to be honest, that was the scariest thing about the movie to me. Did you know that the idea for the glove came from Wes Craven wanting a unique weapon that was primal and related to animal claws?
Yes, and I think Wes I don't know this for certain, but the character of Wolverine from Marvel Comics, right, one of the X-Men, also has those claws, right? And I think he might have just filched a little bit from that, but that's okay. Great artist steal, that's what we do. But speaking of the glove was apparently quite heavy. And England had to be really, really careful with it on set to avoid, injuring the other actors. I think in the 80s, maybe safety wasn't as big a concern as it is now on film sets, because apparently there were some close calls.
Well, okay, I don't mean to interrupt you guys, but am I the only one seeing the irony here that this movie happens to be Johnny Depp's introductory role and the main character has scissor hands? I mean, come on.
I didn't think about it until you just said that, but yeah, that is kind of wild.
It's all connected.
It's all connected.
It is all connected as we are finding out. And I think, Miles, to your comment about the safety is probably true because in the 80s, there just wasn't a lot of safety in general happening. So I'm sure that mindset was just the same on the set as well. All right, here is another fact about how Johnny Depp got that role of Glenn that marked his acting debut. He played the lead female, Nancy's boyfriend. And interestingly, he was not the first choice for the role. Wes Craven cast him after his daughter found him dreamy when she saw his audition tape. And I totally agree. I'm not always like as he becomes an adult, just like
Captain Jack Sparrow.
Yeah, like I'm not just like, oh my gosh, loving Johnny Depp so much and thinking he's so gorgeous and dreamy.
Me too.
But he is dreamy in this movie.
He is dreamy.
So I was like, oh, I see it. I see it here for sure.
Cutie.
So dreamy. I want to talk a little bit about the music because I think the score of this film, composed by Charles Bernstein, is representative of a lot of synth-based scores that we see in the 80s. We have Vangelis, for example, who wrote that amazing score to Blade Runner. Tangerine Dream is all over the place with their soaring synth sounds. Now, I don't think this one quite reaches the level of a Vangelis or Tangerine Dream score. It's a little more. I don't know. Is lo-fi the right word? A little bit more simplistic.
Yeah. Yeah, I get it.
But it's still that use of synth becomes a mainstay of film scores. It almost seems like in the 80s, either John Williams is writing you this great orchestral score or you got a synth score.
Yes. Yes.
That is exactly spot on. And it's funny that you said that about Tangerine Dream, because in the episode, I don't remember how many back it was, it's a big part of the Risky Business score.
Absolutely.
It
Huge.
comes up in our conversation there. But I have to say, the synth sound, it really just, it's not my favorite, but it is so 80s. It just takes me back to my best friend's house with her keyboard, and I can just imagine her banging it out with her keyboard and putting on the different music you could put on, and that's what I think of.
Hysterical. That is hysterical. I can just see you girls like jamming to the keyboard 80s synth.
Yep.
Well, you guys are talking all about the synth music, but I have to say that creepy nursery rhyme that's like 1, 2, Freddy's coming for you. Oh my gosh, it still gives me goosebumps.
That is well done, Missy. Very impressive.
Thank you.
You should be a voice actor.
Oh, I will. They will
do
it. Let me just add that to my repertoire of things I do.
I agree. It was super scary. And even though we were too scared to watch Nightmare on Elm Street, that we knew that song, and at every sleepover we would sing it, scare each other, do all the things to get all spooked out. Now, Nightmare on Elm Street did not receive major award nominations, but it has had lasting impact on the horror genre, as you've talked about, Miles. It has been selected for the preservation in the National Film Registry for being culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant. And I definitely have some thoughts about that as we get more into the film.
I just want to return to the practical effects, which I think are really ingenious. And
Can I ask you a question? When you say practical effects, I want to learn from your genius right now. So what does that mean? Like, I think of special effects, but you keep saying practical effects. So like, what's the difference? Like a 30-second mini lesson.
Well, they are special effects. They are in the realm of special effects, but practical effects are fabricated. They are created practically on set, as opposed to, say, a computer-generated effect.
Gotcha.
That you would see created in the box today via some program, right?
Got it.
Well, most of what you're seeing in Nightmare on Elm Street is done by makeup and effects artists with real fake blood and real prosthetics. And, they would do these things like the scene where the blood gushes out of Glenn's bed. Basically, they turned the set upside down and poured gallons of fake blood through the bed, right? But in the film, it looks like it's shooting up volcano-like through the bed.
Oh, wow.
So that's just a really, a very, utilitarian, practical, ingenious way to achieve an effect, which today would probably be generated in a computer.
Gotcha. You're welcome, real fans, for me not knowing that. That just gave you a little bit of movie education,
Yeah, I've been wondering that too. So I'm glad you told us, but I have one more question about it. So if special effects is the big umbrella and it has practical effects are what you're describing, what's the other, like if it is computer generated, does it have a name like practical effects, or is it just still called special effects?
We call it CGI.
Okay.
Oh, okay. CGI. We know that.
Yeah. All right. And because we've talked about that in some of our films. Okay. Well, one last fascinating fact before we drift off to Nightmare on Elm Street. One of the most creative parts of this movie to me was Freddy's makeup. Special makeup effects artist David B. Miller based Freddy's disfigurement on photographs of burn victims that he actually saw in the UCLA Medical Center.
Interesting.
Wow.
It makes me think, Amanda and I, Miles, you may not know this. It happened probably when you weren't kind of aware of things, and I'm not even sure that you know our family member, but Amanda and I have a family member who was severely burned in a backyard type fire within the last, I would say, 10 years. And the strides that they have made in burn victims, like, I didn't intend on saying this as we talked about Freddy Krueger, like, our cousin, his face, if you didn't know he had been severely burned, you would
You
not
wouldn't
know.
know.
You wouldn't know, because they do all these things with like placenta masks that they
Yeah.
put on them in burn units, and it's incredible. So, look,
It really though is, and it's one of the things that I think is so great about the 80s. And I know you've reviewed ET, and there's many examples, Alien, where the effects, the creatures, the gore is practical, it's real, it's being created on set. And now, with CGI and digital effects that are being created in a computer, increasingly you see. And some of these effects are very sophisticated now with motion capture. And, we talked about Lord of the Rings earlier, and like what Gollum took computer generated effects to an entirely different level. But what they are doing in the 80s with their hands and silicone and real fake blood and, pig's intestines, it's absolutely remarkable. And this film is a shining example of that.
And that's exactly one of the things that we said made us connect with E.T. is we felt like
he's real.
He's
Yes.
real.
Yeah.
And he was on that set with them, and it was like a real being. And I think that made a difference. So, Missy, you ready? Okay, y'all, it is time to head to Elm Street.
our story begins with Tina Gray, a teenage girl who's plagued with horrific nightmares. She's being stalked in these nightmares through a boiler room by a disfigured man wearing a dirty red and green striped sweater, a battered fedora, and a glove fitted with knives on the fingers. And we all know him as Freddy Krueger.
Okay, y'all, at this point in the movie, I was in this moment like, okay, this is going to be really scary. And I also really liked Tina, and I was thinking she was going to be the lead. I was like, I didn't know. I did not remember this from my childhood.
HBO.
I didn't remember. So I was like, okay, Tina, here we go. Well, the next day at school, Tina confides in her best friend, Nancy Thompson, and Nancy's boyfriend, Glenn, who we know is Johnny Depp, about her nightmare. To her surprise, Nancy reveals she has been having similar dreams about the same terrifying figure.
Now everybody is concerned. So they're afraid. They decide to have a sleepover at Tina's house while her mother is away, hoping to make Tina feel safer. And that night, Tina's boyfriend, Rod Lane, played by, oh no, that's not, Johnny is Glenn. Mm-hmm. Missed opportunity for a Johnny Depp joke. Anyway, so Rod crashes the sleepover. And as the night unfolds, Tina falls asleep and once again encounters Freddy in her dreams. And this leads to one of the scenes we have previously mentioned, and I think maybe rightfully could be called one of the most shocking scenes in horror history.
Oh, yes. In her dream, what's happening is Freddy attacks Tina. But in the real world, Rod watches in horror as Tina is, dragged across the ceiling and slashed by invisible blades that he can't see and ultimately killed. Covered in blood and terrified, Rod he heads out. He flees the scene because he's scared. Of course, he's going to be blamed for her murder.
Yeah, I immediately, as the true crime lover that I am, said they are going to think he murdered her for sure.
Yeah.
This totally gave me Exorcist vibes.
Yeah.
And
Me too.
Yeah.
uh-huh. Yeah. And Nancy and Glenn wake up to discover that Tina is dead and realize how gruesome it is. And just like I thought, the police, including Nancy's father, Lieutenant Don Thompson, of course he's a cop, suspects Rod of the murder. But Nancy insists that Rod could not have done it. But no one's buying that.
I wouldn't have bought it. I would have been like, come on, right?
Well, of course, yeah.
Yeah, nobody's expecting some demon ghost to come out of Tina's dream and murder her in her bedroom at night. Surely Rod did it, right? Well, anyway, later on, Rod finds Nancy on her way home from school, tries to explain what he saw. But before he can delve into the details, he's apprehended by the police. They are always ruining everything, aren't they? And he's taken into custody.
And he's obviously like, when he runs up, I'm like, ooh, this guy's on the lam. He's looking rough. And I swear, y'all, I think he was barefoot. Like, I didn't
Well,
know about
he fled in the middle of the night. He was barefooted.
I hope he was barefoot.
came in desert woods and was just like, it's like, oh my gosh.
I mean, Freddy's coming out of his girlfriend's dream in the middle of the night. He's not going to take time to put his shoes on.
This is true. Okay, I'll
That
give
is
credit
so
to that.
funny that you noticed that. Okay, and so then that night, y'all, Nancy tries to stay awake. Like she's like, I'm not going to sleep. But of course, what happens? You just succumb to sleep, and she's in her English class, right? Because she tried
Yes.
not to sleep the night before. So she's in her English class and she falls asleep.
Now, time out before you tell what happens. Y'all, I love sleep. Miles, I don't know if you know this, but even in my adult life now, I take a nap every afternoon for a little nap. So honestly, the idea of lack of sleep alone is a nightmare to me. Like, that is the worst nightmare I could think of. And that would be a real issue. It'd be a real problem for me.
Are you a napper, Miles?
I am not a napper.
I'm not a napper either. Everything in my world has to be perfect before
Yeah.
I could nap. And it takes me as long to go to sleep in a nap as Amanda takes a nap.
Yeah, I find actually that napping outside, first, when would I? And secondly, it actually makes me more tired as I'm sort of coming back out of the nap. I also really like the feeling of just being absolutely exhausted at the end of the day, so that I don't lie in bed and roll around. I just
Toss and turn.
Yeah, like my head hits the pillow and I'm basically out.
Yeah.
Yeah, that happens for me too. I can anytime just go to sleep. No
All
problem.
right, y'all, we're going right back to English
Okay.
class, right? Don't forget Nancy's fallen asleep, and you know what happens. You know who shows up. Freddy is there. She sees him, and she's trying to get away from him, and she even burns her arm on a hot pipe in that dream. And when she wakes up, and of course you can imagine the laughter and startling of those around her in class, but she finds a burn mark on her arm in reality. So what happened in the dream came with her.
Yeah, so this is where she has that realization that things that happen in her dreams are also going to show up in real life. And she becomes determined to understand what's happening. She goes to visit Rod in jail because she wants the scoop about what really happened.
So Rod describes Tina's horrific death and mentions the man with knives for fingers, confirming that he too has been dreaming of Freddy. So that night, Nancy decides to take a bath because, she's got to relax. It's a lot going on. A bubble bath, of course, because, that covers the nudity. Anyway, so this leads to the iconic bathtub scene because as she dozes off, Freddy's glove emerges from beneath the water and attempts to drown her.
Yes. Go ahead, Missy.
Well, I just have to say, you may take naps every single day, but I take baths every single day. I love my hot bath, and this scene freaks me out.
Well, I read about it and talking about like practical effects, this is a cool thing. they made this work with a bottomless bathtub that they had a pool underneath. And the part where she goes, they get pulled under, and you can see like the swimming. It's like a bottomless bathtub. So it's kind of cool.
But how do you have a bottomless bathtub?
Well, I mean, I'm sure the whole thing's not bottomless, but there's like a part cut out that like goes, there's a pool underneath there.
I think it's shot in two halves. When she's in the bathtub, it's a bathtub, but then when she goes under, because the bathtub seems to be much deeper than a standard operating procedure bathtub, right? That part is actually shot in a pool.
Okay. Yeah. That
Miles,
makes sense.
when you're watching things like this, just because this is your world, do you find yourself just mind reeling, trying to figure out how they did that or how you would do something like that today? Like, are you just always thinking differently than the average movie watcher?
Sometimes, yes. But at the end of the day, I love movies. I love to just be taken in and go on the ride, and I'm willing to suspend disbelief and let it take me.
So you're not over analyzing every movie you watch. You're being entertained as well.
That is my aspiration. Now, if something really crazy happens and I'm like, oh, how did they do that? Then I'll look into it or I'll watch it again and see if I can figure it out. But on first watch, I just want to go on the ride.
Yeah. Well, she ultimately does escape, and she's shaken, but she is more determined than ever before to stay awake.
And this is when she first realizes she's aging. I think that took me a minute to get that. And she looks in the mirror and comments, "I look like I'm 20 years old."
Oh, bless her heart, as we say in the South. Bless your heart. Well, she finds some, off-brand no-dos because she's going to use that to help her stay up. Did either of you two, like in college, take no-dos to stay awake or some brand of it?
I didn't. Did you take it for drive? I feel like you took it before when you had to drive.
Yes, I have taken caffeine pills for driving because I used to drive long distances either to school. I went to school in North Carolina, and I lived in LA for a while, and I made that trip cross country, and sometimes I would take it to stay awake while driving.
Does it work? It never worked for me. It just made me feel horrible and antsy and yucky and headachy.
I guess I might have been psychosomatic, but I convinced myself that it worked. And of course, now it's been replaced by 5-Hour Energy, and I think maybe that works.
Have you taken that?
I have used it to stay awake on a drive. I mean, all this stuff is of course terrible for you, but
yeah, it is.
But if absolutely necessary, I needed to stay awake to stay alive, I probably would have made the same choice. Go for the no-dos.
Well, I guess any of us would probably.
And for you, that is a true thing because you have fallen asleep at the wheel.
I did in high school fall asleep at the wheel and have a really terrible accident. It's true.
Yeah. So it's you need it.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right.
So public service announcement. Take it if you need it, but public service announcement. Don't take it unless you need it.
Right.
Exactly.
Last resort.
Well, desperate for help, Nancy turns to her parents, but they dismiss her fears as trauma from Tina's death. Oh, your friend Tina died. You're just having a hard time dealing with it.
Another bless your heart.
Another bless your heart. Her mother, Marge, takes her to, oh my gosh, this whole thing, to a sleep disorder clinic where Nancy has another nightmare, of course, right? Gets into the sleep, has the nightmare. And during this episode, she manages to grab Freddy's hat and pull it into the real world, astonishing doctors because when they come in there to wake her up and she pulls the covers back and she pulls out Freddy's hat, there were so many things about this. First of all, Freddy's hat, I was like, that looks like it's from Spirit Halloween. Like, what is this? And it also this is happening at the University of Medicine. That was another hilarious thing I noticed. And just the mom in this scene, the mom's hair in this scene was a character of its own. Like the whole thing was just so much.
She lights up a cigarette in the lab in the doctor's office, which, by the way, people would have done back in the 80s. Let me just light up my cig.
She was 100% waiting for her to fall asleep and is just like nervous and like smoking her cigarette. It was just all 80s. All 80s.
Well, clearly you guys have never visited the University of Medicine.
Clearly. Clearly we have not.
That's where everybody goes when they're being chased by a former serial killer, ghost demon, nightmare killer like Freddy.
That's right.
Anyway, so in the aforementioned hat, Nancy sees the name Fred Krueger written inside, and she begins to sense, as children sometimes do, that her mom knows more than she's letting on. So she confronts her mother and demands answers. Well, Mom reluctantly reveals the dark secret she's been hiding. That is, years ago, Freddy Krueger was a serial child murderer who escaped justice on a technicality, air quotes again. Out of vengeance, the parents of Elm Street, including Marge and Don, hunt Fred Krueger down and burn him alive in his boiler room hideout, because of course he's hiding out in a boiler room.
I feel bad about laughing from this, but it really is ludicrous and funny.
When she brings her down to the basement to tell this story, I'm dying. Not just, like you said, not just a child murderer, serial murderer. He murdered 20 neighborhood children. Yeah. And none of these high school students have heard this. They know nothing about it. They're like,
you would think that'd be in the news, you know?
It would be like town folklore.
People would be talking about it.
Oh, yeah. It would be something they would share around those Halloween bonfires every year.
But I think they mean to imply that the parents buried it all, you know, that.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Like they kept it hidden, even though it was 20 children.
Yeah.
Missing suddenly from your kindergarten class. But anyway, now it seems that Freddy has returned from beyond the grave to bring revenge on the ones who harmed him by stalking their children through their dreams.
Nancy, however, is determined to stop him because don't interrupt Nancy's bubble bath. You don't get away with that. So she devises a plan. She asks her boyfriend, Glenn, there's Johnny, to watch over her as she attempts to bring Freddy into the real world by grabbing him during a dream.
But, Glenn, he falls asleep watching TV. He can't stay away. And by the way, did y'all notice the TV that he had in the bed with him? It's like the size of a small ice chest sitting right there in the middle of his bed.
It did.
Oh my gosh. Anyway, when he falls asleep, old Freddy shows up and unfortunately claims another victim. I mean, this is the scene you were talking about earlier, Miles, right? And it's horrifying.
Yeah, you get sucked right up into the bed.
And then blood volcano, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's pretty awesome.
Well, Nancy is devastated. She's freaking out, but remains determined now more than ever in her mission to stop Freddy. She barricades her house and starts setting booby traps, and she prepares for a final showdown.
Okay, I have to interrupt again here because I have to say, as I was watching her set all these booby traps, I was thinking of Macaulay Culkin. Is that the way you say his name?
Yeah.
And they had Home Alone vibes. I was thinking Joe Pesci was going to be coming in along with Freddy. Like, I got so tickled in this part.
Oh, I did too. And think about this to add to that. So she contacts her father, who's across the street, investigating Glenn's death. And of course, she's begging him to come over. And because she's locked in. So she is begging him to come over. And she tells him to come back in 20 minutes. Okay. Well, she goes back to finish booby trapping the house. So this is what happens. She booby traps the house and is going to sleep to confront Freddy. Couple things. One, her dad is not very convincing that he's going to come wake her up in 20 minutes. Like she should have known. Like he's totally just patronizing me because he's like, okay, honey, go get some sleep. Peace out. He's not coming. And then second of all, she sets up the whole booby trap scenario like and gets to sleep before the 20 minutes is up. Like she's a real MacGyver. I could not. I like
Nancy is savvy. Give Nancy some credit because in the dream world, she confronts Freddy and she manages to grab hold of him just as her alarm clock goes off and pulls him into reality according to plan. Freddy is disoriented. He chases Nancy through the house, triggers her traps. She douses him with gasoline and deja vu sets him on fire.
And when her father, go ahead, Amanda.
Well, I was just going to say before you hop into that, when he is falling and tripping over those booby traps, I was like, this is when how can this be scary? It was like he was a clown tripping around the house. I couldn't get over it. I was so tickled.
Well, her father does finally arrive.
Yeah, after she screams and yells and breaks the windows.
And they discover when they get there, finally, the fiery footprints leading upstairs. And that's when they find Freddy smothering Marge in her bedroom. And as they extinguish the flames, Freddy and Marge vanish into the bed, disappearing before their eyes.
In the final confrontation, Nancy realizes that Freddy feeds off her fear. So she turns her back on him, declaring that he has no power over her. And as she does, Freddy lunges, but before he can strike, he evaporates into nothingness. Whoosh.
Ball game, right?
Yeah, he's gone.
Freddy's dead. But then we get a next scene, a coda, if you will. It's morning, and Nancy steps outside into bright daylight. Her mother is alive and well. The fog of terror seemingly lifted.
It felt a bit Mayberry-ish, didn't it, y'all? Like everything's okay.
Yeah. And that is our clue, right? Because then we see Glenn, Rod, and Tina all pull up in a convertible to take Nancy to school. But as they drive away, the car's roof, a red and green stripe pattern reminiscent of Freddy's sweater, slams shut and traps them all inside.
Marge doesn't realize it because they're a little bit down the road. So she's waving goodbye from the doorstep. And suddenly that startle comes and Freddy's arm bursts through the front door window, grabbing her and pulling her inside as Nancy screams. And the film ends, leaving us all the audiences questioning reality versus dream. And is Freddy really gone?
Well, of course he isn't, because the ambiguous ending is meant to set the stage for numerous sequels that would further cement Freddy Krueger as a lasting and iconic figure in horror cinema. The blending of dream and reality keeps viewers on edge, questioning what's real right up until the credits roll. But hint, hint, the last scene is a dream.
So I have to ask you, I know we're going to talk about if it measures up to today's movies, which I especially am excited to hear what Miles has to say. But it did have a huge franchise. Did y'all see any of the sequels? I did not. I was a one and done with Freddy Krueger.
Absolutely.
I
watched the sequels. Yeah.
Amanda?
We saw them. Like I said, as I got older at sleepovers and stuff like that. I didn't see it in the movies. At the theater, not in the movies, at the theater.
I did see the third one. I think the third one on in the theater.
Okay.
Which was Dream Warriors.
Oh.
From 1987.
Okay. I was in college at that time and was not going to see Freddy Krueger.
I have a quick question before we do does Nightmare on Elm Street hold up discussion. Real quick. Nancy. So I, I kept thinking like, I don't know, like something about Nancy. She wasn't what I think of as the lead girl in a horror movie. I don't know. I guess that she was supposed to be kind of
I have an opinion on this.
goody, but that hair, I'm like, could we get some like mousse or gel for this girl? And she just like, I
Well,
would have preferred Tina.
well, I think she had a little bit of a Brooke Shields look, but they
Oh yeah,
didn't
you
have a
told me that.
Brooke Shields budget. And so she had
Mm.
kind of that natural look, kind of the
Yeah, she did have
bigger
the eyebrows. It's
eyebrows.
true.
And so they're like, hey, we could get this girl without the paycheck for Brooke. What do you think, Miles?
Heather Langenkamp. Yeah, I would tend to agree. I think she really hadn't done a lot. She was originally in The Outsiders from '83 with that cast. I mean, you
Uh-huh.
probably know some of the folks who are in that. Um, but her scenes were deleted. Then she was in a TV movie called Passions, 1984, and then she was cast in Nightmare on Elm Street. So she was a real newbie. Um, but I do think she's got a bit of a Brooke Shields vibe, and this would have been a period where Brooke would have been
That,
a get, right?
Yeah, they
yeah,
could have
that would have worked.
capitalized on that. Okay, so here we go. Our question that we ask every time: does A Nightmare on Elm Street still hold up today?
Who's going first? Missy, you go.
So I'm not really the one to go because I'm not into this genre,
But
but
you have to. You have to make a decision.
okay,
You can think
so
about
I'm
how
gonna say yes because it's like we were talking about with ET and my new verbiage that Miles taught me, the practical effects. Um, make it make it seem more real than some of the things we see today. So I'm gonna say yeah. I'm gonna say yeah, it does.
I'm letting you go last, Miles, because I think you'll have something important to say.
Oh, I hope
I'm
so.
going to say, I'm going to base it solely on the fact that as a child, I was terrified of this movie. As an adult, I was hilariously entertained by this movie. So it doesn't hold up for me in that way that it was still terrifying and scary. Um, but I do think it was a classic, and I do think it from that side of it, that perspective, there it certainly holds up in that way
Yeah.
for the time that it
Well, you
was
know,
created.
Amanda, when you talk about today's horror movies, a lot of them, and Miles, you might speak into this as you kind of wrap up this part of us discussing this. To me, they go into areas that freak me out. Like it can't just be a scary movie. Like it's
Yeah.
almost like it's either got to be otherworldly or there's like sacrilege in them and they're hard for me to watch. So I guess in my little simple mind, it holds the test of time because it is a classic that I can still watch without kind of getting in freak out mode. Like I still know that it's just a fun horror movie. All right, Miles, take it away.
Yeah, I think for what it is in its time, I think it was pretty special. I think despite the fact that this is a podcast about films from the '80s, the '70s was the decade where horror really found its footing with elevated character-driven horror pieces like The Exorcist, which we mentioned earlier, Rosemary's Baby. Um, I don't think it's quite on par with Halloween in
I
terms of
agree.
this kind of genre, the sort of singular, terrifying killer chasing the young people of the neighborhood. I think Halloween is a little better. Um, but I do think it is inventive in coming up. I mean, just in terms of its premise, I think that's really that and its practical effects are where its strength lies. I mean, this premise that someone is chasing you, haunting you in your dreams. And if he captures you, if he catches you and kills you, you die in real life. That is a terrifying conceit. I
Yes.
mean, that very concept is in a makes, in a very visceral a way is frightening.
Yeah,
And
true. That's true.
And I think Nightmare capitalizes on that. I think the look of its villain is really cool and spooky. Even though one thing that struck me in watching this again is you don't really see much of Freddy in this first film.
I think, can I tell you, interrupt you
Yeah.
really quickly?
Yeah.
I don't have the exact number, but I honestly think I meant to add this to our facts and I forgot to go, but I believe he's only in the movie a total of like 7 or 8 minutes.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's really short.
But you have to respect that it struck a chord. I mean, it spawned 6 sequels, 7 if you count. Well, 6 sequels, right? Because the original, and then there were six other movies counting Wes Craven's New Nightmare from 1994. So it captured the imagination.
For sure.
And it is a film in a handful of films from the 1980s that I think it puts you there. You think of Nightmare on Elm Street, you think of where you were when you saw it, whether you saw it at the theater or you saw it,
Yes,
at a
great
friend's
point.
on HBO, right? It takes you to a place. And that in and of itself is an achievement.
Okay, so
Agreed.
a final question I'm going to ask you guys. We all agreed that if Halloween had been in the 80s, that's the movie we would have done. So, Miles, when we were considering which one to do, we were kind of seesawing on Friday the 13th or A Nightmare on Elm Street. Did we choose the right one?
So the original Friday is 1980, I think, right?
I think so.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
You know what? I might say the original Friday the 13th is a slightly better movie, but Nightmare on Elm Street is more fun.
Oh, great
answer.
Yeah.
Great
Yeah.
answer.
That's a good
Miles,
answer.
thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, it has been so much fun, guys. Thank you for having me.
You'll have to come back and do another one with us.
Absolutely.
I would love to do so.
We'd love it. Thank you for sharing all your knowledge.
My pleasure, guys.
Well, we hope you guys enjoyed revisiting this classic scary movie with us.
We love hearing from you, so please take a moment to share this episode with your friends, leave us a review, and let us know what you think.
And let us end this one by simply saying, sweet dreams.
Bye, y'all.
Bye-bye.
Don't die.